Pardon me, Captain. Captain, someone just told me that land had been sighted. Is it true?
It certainly is, Chaplain Whitfield, and no one is happier about it than I am.
Looks like the port of Lewistown, Captain, about 3 miles north.
Lewistown? Well, we were off course. Let's make for that port, mate. From there, it's only some 100 miles or so to the biggest city in the colonies.
What city is that, Captain?
Philadelphia, Chaplain Whitfield. Philadelphia.
We greet our friends everywhere with Chapter 15 of Apostle of Two Continents, the story of George Whitefield. This is another in the series Stories of Great Christians and comes to you from the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago.
Yes?
Reverend George Whitefield?
Yes.
Ah, good. We'd heard you'd come to Philadelphia, and we're honored, sir, deeply honored. My name is Triton, Eric Triton, and I represent the ministers of Philadelphia. We're hoping that you'll preach around the city before you leave.
Come in, Mr. Triton. Sit down, please.
Thank you. I hope you find your lodgings to your liking, Mr. Whitefield. If we'd had any idea that you were going to be in this part of the colonies.
I'm afraid none of us had that idea, Mr. Triton. You see, en route for England, we were driven off course by adverse winds, and no one on board the ship had any idea where we were.
Oh, harrowing. Absolutely harrowing.
Not so much as you might think. God often puts us into situations where there's no alternative but to trust Him. At times like that, there's necessity of great soul-searching.
That's the very kind of thing we'd like to put before our Philadelphia congregations. Most have heard of your rather interesting innovations on the usual service, preaching outside, unread prayers, and the like. We'd have no trouble at all in securing large audiences.
Am I to be some sort of display or entertainment, Mr. Triton?
Well, no, of course not. God's work, sir. We all know that.
Your statements trouble me. But I shall be happy to meet with the clergy of Philadelphia and discuss the possibility of meetings here.
Fine, fine. Well, I shall pass your word along, and we'll be getting in touch immediately as to times and places and the working out of any other details. Thank you very much, Mr. Whitefield.
Thank you, sir. Here, let me...
No, don't bother. I can let myself out. You just rest up from that trip and let me handle all the...
Excuse me.
Pardon me, sir. I should have been looking where I was going. I'll be getting in touch with you, Mr. Whitefield.
Thank you, Mr. Triton. Goodbye.
Do you mind if I just come in while the door's open?
No, come in.
Mr. Whitefield, I don't want to take much of your time, but I would like to talk over the possibility of a few things with you.
You have me at a disadvantage, sir. You know who I am, but...
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have introduced myself. Franklin is the name. Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin? Poor Richard's Almanac? Are you that Benjamin Franklin?
I'm flattered that you recognize me.
There's no need for that. There are very few on either side of the Atlantic that haven't been at least heard your name mentioned. Do come in.
I know you must be tired after your long voyage and the overland trip here, so I won't take much of your time. All I'm interested in for my Gazette are your plans while in Philadelphia. How long you plan to stay, questions such as that.
Well, as you probably already know, none of us planned on coming to Philadelphia at all. Our ship was driven off course.
Yes, I've heard that.
Actually, God's good hand was in evidence through it all. Fortunately, I had a supply of food which had been taken to Savannah for the orphanages. We're starting there. Had it not been for those supplies, which were over and above what the ship normally carried, we might have all starved. And too, Lewistown was sighted at the very last possible moment.
Oh?
That's right. Our drinking water supply was gone. Actually, we had 1/2 pint left, but that wasn't worth even thinking about.
So you believe that God brought you here?
Yes, I do. I'm not sure why exactly, but I shall use the time to gather more supplies for the orphanage before I actually leave for Georgia. The others in my company have already left for Savannah to begin operations and construction.
Then you plan to collect supplies and any money you can to help your orphanage enterprise?
A few men already this morning have approached me with invitations to preach here in Philadelphia. You bumped into one just a few minutes ago. I hope to be responsible to my duty as a messenger of God while here, and I hope also to help the orphanage work.
Well, people will come to hear you. You have a unique reputation among churchmen. Some agree, some disagree, but all know of you. Which brings me to the second part of my visit here. I should like to put into print some of your sermons and possibly a few of your journals.
You want some of my sermons?
That's right. Makes good business sense to me to print your sermons while you're here in Philadelphia and being talked about.
You show yourself to be every bit as practical a man as poor Richard, Mr. Franklin.
I try to be.
Have you considered the practical aspects of taking the sacrifice of God for your own sins?
I shall make it a point to attend some of your services and personally proofread every one of your sermons, Mr. Whitefield, so preaching here is unnecessary. I can tell you that we disagree on a number of points, however. What about the material for print?
You shall have it. And I look forward to seeing you at some of my services, and for that matter, at any time for an informal visit.
Well, I shall be there along with what I'm sure will prove to be crowds. We'll all come to hear you speak, but I think you'll find it another problem to convert us, and an even greater one to obtain money from us.
Franklin, Ben Franklin.
Oh, Hardy. I didn't see you here this afternoon.
Small wonder. Have you ever seen such gatherings as this fellow Whitefield is able to draw?
Never. As I look around, I see representatives of every denomination and sect, and this typical of his meetings. It's a matter of speculation to me to observe how much they admire and respect him, in spite of his common abuse of them. He assures them that they were naturally half beasts and half devils.
I know. Makes me uneasy, that's what it does. And the man preaches everywhere.
And everywhere you can feel his influence. Listen to the conversations of people as they chat on the street. Religious matters.
Yeah, it's like a plague, that's what it is. And what about the way he seems to take the money right out of your pocket?
Don't I know that experience? Earlier this week, I happened to attend one of his sermons, in the course of which I perceived that he intended to finish with the collection. And I silently resolved he should get nothing from me. I had in my pocket a handful of copper money, 3 or 4 silver dollars, and 5 in gold. As he proceeded, I began to soften and concluded to give the copper.
Well, that's just the way it is.
Exactly. Another stroke of his oratory made me ashamed of that and determined me to give the silver. And he finished so admirably that I emptied my pocket into the collection dish, gold and all. You know, in his homeland, he was known as a spiritual pickpocket, Hardy. I think we're seeing the justification for such a name.
The things he says about God and all, they're awfully hard to let pass.
He is a good preacher and an excellent fellow. I've made it a point to make his acquaintance. There is no sham in him.
But you don't believe all of what he says about sin and judgment?
I'm not sure anyone can really know all that he claims to know. Don't let me discourage your inclination to follow him.
Oh, I'm not thinking of anything like that.
Possibly you'd better hear him a few more times.
I think I might, once or twice more, until my curiosity about him is satisfied.
George, I must admit it. I am defeated.
In what way, Ben?
You remember on our first meeting I told you that people would come to see you, but that as far as anything you might consider practical resulting from your meetings, You might just as well give up the idea?
I remember something like that, yes.
Well, I was wrong. I've never been this far wrong in my predictions before. Even poor Richard does a better job with the weather. Look at these.
What are those?
Orders, George. Literally hundreds of book orders. And for what kind of books? Religious books. The whole colony has suddenly become God-minded. And it's your doing, George.
I can't agree, Ben. If it were all my doing, the people would be Whitefield-minded. This is God's doing.
You really believe that, don't you?
By now you should know that I do. I wish you could see the truth of it.
Can anyone really know the truth? Is there such a thing as absolute truth?
Good-sounding questions, Ben. But almost sheer nonsense, you know.
I find an educated minister a rare treat, George. I do wish you'd build your orphanage here in Philadelphia. We could enjoy many more pleasurable discussions.
How deceptive vain pleasure is, whether mental or physical. For one moment, I, too, would rather have wallowed in intellectual gymnastics than really accomplish anything worthwhile.
Seriously, George, don't you think it more practical to start your orphanage here? Philadelphia has certainly enough orphans, and you have to send here for many of your materials, supplies. Almost seems a waste of money to do all of that at such a long range.
No, Ben, I'm not tempted. I know God would have this work started in exactly the place I've seen. My being chosen by the colony trustees as missionaries to Georgia, the massive funds, the well-organized plans, the awareness of the need, all point to Savannah.
And you call all these things indicators of God's will?
That's right, Ben. I'm really not surprised that it sounds like nonsense to you. The only real way to prove completely the Christian experience is in just that, experience.
So I've heard you say. It almost sounds as though you have compared ideas with Gilbert Tennant.
Gilbert who?
Tennant, young preacher who's written some things that I've published.
I don't believe I've heard of him.
What reminded me of him was a statement of his that might as well be yours. He said, "We can preach the gospel of Christ no further than we have experienced its power in our own hearts."
That's excellent.
I rather thought you'd like it. This man's father, William Tennant, operates a small school near here in Neshaminy. Actually, it's a kind of seminary for ministerial students.
I had no idea that such a thing existed in the colonies.
Would you like to see it? I'm sure the elder Tennant would be very glad to meet you.
I should like to see it very much.
Of course, I shall not accompany you. I'm afraid the Tennants are a little more avid in their disagreement with my theological position.
I don't know how they could be, Ben. I didn't know you had any.
Well, there are those who think that no position is a position in itself. Why don't you visit the log college? That's what it's called. I think you'll find that you and the Tennants have much in common.
And so we conclude Chapter 15 of Apostle of Two Continents, the story of George Whitefield. This is another in the series Stories of Great Christians. It comes to you from the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago.